This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the 14th episode in Season 2 of The Bad Batch. The episode is titled Tipping Point, and we have two guests joining us for the show. Of course, our first guest is Mason Zehr. Mason, welcome back, buddy.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Ready to do some Bad Batch?
Yes.
It was very fun to watch this episode with you and get your perspectives. I'm looking forward to that. And we also have another guest. He is the insightful, the awesome Greg Recast. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with, a podcasting legend and just a real role model who I look up to. And it's good to see you as well, Dan.
I was hoping you were going to go that direction. Hey, I will not argue with that in the very least. Absolutely not. Well, this is going to be fun because this is an episode where we're kind of tying things up and bringing them together. And I know, Greg, in your podcasting day job with Greg McLaughlin on the Royal Base Card, you both ask a lot of really insightful, poignant questions. So somehow I'm going to get a crystal ball and try to avoid those topics. So I don't want Greg chasing me.
Yeah, it was hard to write notes for this because I'm like, I actually have to say things, not just ask questions. So we'll see how the skills translate, but it's a little tricky.
I have faith in you. You have an excellent resume. The beginning of this starts out very dark, very sinister. We see clones have been arrested, which is no surprise because we've been paying attention to Season 2. And then we have this wonderful escape. But before we get to that, I want everybody to weigh in with their one word to describe the episode and overall thoughts on Tipping Point. And Greg, why don't you go first?
Ooh, overall, single word, I said escalation. It felt like we're in a part of the season where everything's just ticking upwards, right? I was thinking of a roller coaster, and as you get towards the top of the hill, you hear it click, click, click before the big ride. So general impressions because of that are that I'm interested to see where this is going, but it in some ways felt almost incomplete as a story, right? As much as I liked moments in it, it's like, I think it's my final thoughts on it will really depend on what happens in the episodes to come. But maybe we can change that tonight before I start grading later.
Okay, well, good. Then we'll see how that works out. Mason, you're not only are you my son, but I've known you your whole life, so it's pretty much the same thing. But you have the name Steph Curry on your thing, and it keeps throwing me off. Mason, tell me your one word and your overall feelings on the episode.
My one word is torture, because what the doctor and Dr. Royce and the nurse didn't get her name. But mostly the doctor, the nurse was like almost trying to prevent it, but they were torturing him. Yeah,
which was hard to watch. Very, very hard to watch for an animated show or anything for that matter. My one word is intense. Everything, whereas the last episode was pretty much one lovely exhale, besides a little bit of intensity with a little bit of a tsunami. This one, the entire thing, besides a few moments with Omega, you really feel, as you said, I like that idea of the click, click, click of the roller coaster going up that hill, because you have a feeling that when you go down the hill, you don't even know if there's going to be a track. And there's a lot of anticipation here. And what's great about this is we have no idea what is going to happen. What we do know is that we've got 2 episodes left, and I cannot wait. In fact, at the end of this, Greg, I'm going to ask you a question that Mason and I have been debating as far as what we're going to do next week when we wake up early. So let's talk about it again. I talked about the Dark and Sinister ending. The clones are arrested. Then there's a spectacular rescue mission. It was great to see Echo right away. But Mason, what stood out to you about this rescue at the beginning?
It was crazy to see Echo and Firebolt, and I think it was Gregor.
I think so too.
Them too. And because you weren't exactly thinking, I bet next episode Echo's going to be in it. So it was fun to see all them. And then it was a very intense mission.
Absolutely. Greg, what about you? What stands out to you about this opening sequence?
My thought is much more childish. I want that ship in Lego. Almost immediately, I said, I want that Lego model where you can break off the side and then go and launch that. So I thought it was really fun. The best Star Wars designs to me kind of honor what's come before, but do something a little different. And you saw it was kind of reminiscent of some of the Clone Wars droid landers and things like that, but it was its own unique thing. And so I thought that was really cool. And then it was nice to see Echo again. We're getting to a point with Bad Batch where, like old Clone Wars, you don't know who you're focusing on when the episode starts. It's not guaranteed that it's the batch. So that's a lot of fun to get to check in with these different contingencies.
Absolutely. And I do not remember Fireball from the Clone Wars. And I did not take the time to look him up. Do either of you remember anything about Fireball? No. Mason remarked when we were watching this today, isn't it kind of fun that they just recognize each other right away, even when they're wearing their armor?
I know. Like they're wearing the same armor. Hi, Fireball. How do you know I'm not like Rex or Cody?
Right. Echo's a little easier to figure out, but Echo, it is great to see Echo back. He is one of my favorites. Right away, they are trying to delete all of the Imperial records and data files. So, of course, when you've got Echo there, you can jump right in and try to retrieve some of it. Now, they try intimidation on this Imperial agent. I'm not sure what his rank is. He does make a big point of straightening his insignia on his chest as he's getting into the ship itself. You can tell, as with most Imperials, they carry themselves as very haughty, very pretentious. And then instead of talking or facing or even finding out what's really going on, he does what happens in The Heiress, in the second season of The Mandalorian, when we first meet a live action Bo-Katan. He bites into this like electric cyanide capsule thing. Again, very, very intense for animation. I never really pay attention when Bad Batch starts to see what the rating is. Did it say a rating for this one? Do you remember?
I assume Y7, is that the kind of older?
I would think so, but I mean, even you're a parent, Greg. I mean, Mason is obviously a child, but Mason and I can talk about all kinds of great stuff, which of course parents do with their kids. But what do you make about that when you see something like that on an animated show? I mean, I think it completely fits the tone and what we're going for on this, and I think it's an important connection piece to Mandalorian plus Star Wars in general. But it is at least something as a parent that I am aware of.
Yeah, so I've been jealous all season listening to you and Mason talk. So my son Henry is 7, and he was all in on Bad Batch season 1. And then when this year it started up again, I said, I saved Bad Batch for us to walk together. And he said, nah, that's your thing. I'm okay. And so he hasn't been watching with me. And it's, it's a phase he's going through. He's very into Lego Ninjago, which I'm sure you've been through in your household too. So he's let Star Wars be dad's thing, but I'm going to win him back, I can tell. But it's funny you asked me this question tonight because I was watching, just before family dinner and sitting alone in our living room. And my wife passed through actually at the very end, and she said, this is a kid's show. And she's somebody who checks in on Star Wars now and again when I'm watching it, but was very surprised because I do think I would hesitate before letting Henry see this much at age 7. And I guess that's about where the rating is at. Mm-hmm. But I certainly think even if they don't show violence, back to your word, there's an intensity. Well, your word intensity and Mason's word torture. I mean, those are not Saturday morning cartoons usually. No, you're right. And that is something we see throughout with Crosshair. Let's talk about Crosshair. He is he's won me over. I still don't understand what his original thought process was. I mean, he told us, but I can't pretend to think that way because that's just not how I think. But the fact that we're getting perspective and understanding of him up to this point makes this episode have much more weight because we care about him. We really care about him and what's happening. He's in prison. He sees other clones too, but there's definitely an end game for Crosshair, and it's not one that I originally expected. Mason, why do they want Crosshair, and what did you think was happening with him?
They want Omega.
Right, and why did they want Crosshair for that?
Because they know he was part of Clone Force 99 and they knew they couldn't get Clone Force 99. And when he said they won't give her up, you can tell he was, when he said it, he was kind of nervous, and he said, well, she's property of the Empire. They have no choice.
Yeah. Dr. Hemlock, it seems like in that moment, he's much more artificial in a sense, because like you said, Mason, he completely stumped that. What do you mean she's Imperial property? Of course they're going to turn her over. Crosshair, I like that you said that he looked a little bit nervous. And Crosshair, you want to talk about a guy that is very, very, very calm and steady. It's one of the reasons why he's such a good shot. We do get to see a great sequence with that. But the psychology of Crosshair, I think, is really, really fun. I mean, it's not fun to be Crosshair, but I think it's cool that they are taking this character that when we first met him in the last season of the Clone Wars, he just seemed like kind of a cranky, not a bully per se, but just a very prickly person. And now we're seeing that stubbornness, that tenacity is really benefiting Clone Force 99, but it's certainly putting him in a very precarious situation.
Yeah, as I watched this episode, I was thinking a lot about Crosshair's whole journey, and it reminded me, there was a moment where he kind of tapped his head, and I was like, wait, does he still have a chip? And then I remembered the big revelation in season 1 was that he'd been doing these actions of his own choice, that he didn't have the chip. And so that Crosshair was, as you said, prickly and really kind of dastardly, like a good cartoon villain. And now we're seeing that this journey he's been on, and I think his 3 episodes have been real standouts this season.
Yes.
And understanding how now he's changed so much. And, actually, again, we'll whisper so he doesn't hear. But one of the questions I'm going to ask Greg tomorrow on our show is, what makes Crosshair so immediately warn the Bad Batch? Because that does seem like that's a different Crosshair than the one we've been seeing previously, that he would reach out and he would speak to his brothers who not that long ago he was swearing vengeance against. So I'm curious how that represents his change. And you can cheat and answer that question if either of you have thoughts on it.
I definitely do. Mason, what do you think?
He said Plan 88, which means they were being targeted.
Right, but why do you think he suddenly is ready to help them?
Because he notices the Empire will do him no good.
That's true. And I think, as we saw in the last episode, the last episode was the absolute nail in the coffin for his presence in the Empire. But as he's walking down that hallway and he's looking and he's seeing these clones, and I think he's finally seeing himself in them. For whatever reason, he always felt like an outcast in a group of outcasts, which is really saying something. And I feel like that combined with what happened, who's the clone that he was friends with that was killed in the last one?
Mayday,
of course. The one I said was one of my favorites, and I can't even remember his name. So that's nice. But yes, I think that is completely that's it. And plus the way they're torturing. He sees the complete disdain the Empire has for clones, and treating them like less than is probably a compliment, because the disdain, the hate, the disgust the Empire treats the clones with. And I think that's an interesting question too. Why do they despise the clones so much? The clones are what helped to get them where they're at. That just shows that that's just who they are. They're just, I don't want to say they're haters. That seems so, but that's really what they are. What do you think? Greg, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, so I think both of you answered answers I would give, but I would add to that, I also think he has a soft spot for Omega, because they had a little bit of connection in the Camino Lost finale last season. And, I think there's a part of him that even when he wants the batch caught and destroyed, he doesn't wish that upon Omega, because maybe she's innocent in that. But you're also right, and there's been a lot of talk this week after the last Mandalorian, episode 3 in Mandalorian, about the differences between the New Republic and the Empire. And, this kind of base level hatred for the clones and this kind of treating them as inhuman, as tools to win a war, right? Whereas we saw the New Republic dismantling the Imperial War Fleet, here we have the Empire dismantling the Grand Army of the Republic. The difference, of course, is that these are human beings, and that matters, or it should matter. And I think you're absolutely right to say that, Crosshair has just seen the absolute worst of it. And he's had a lot of lonely breakfasts by himself, right? He's not feeling that family, which is such a key part of a good Star Wars story is that found family. And he needs that, I think, like any of us would.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Yes, which adds to the idea that clones do have a soul, which Filoni has said repeatedly. That the way that he carries himself in this, again, that tenacity that he has shown as long as we've known him, serves him very, very well because of the intense loyalty that he has for his people, and also at the end of season 1, he save Omega's life as she's frowning. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. There's definitely something there. Were you going to say something, Mace?
I thought it was Tech.
I
maybe
think
they both do.
They probably
they're
both
different
do.
times.
Yeah, boy, it's been so long since I've seen that one, but it would be fun to rewatch season 1 again, boy, especially after all this. So Dr. Royce Hemlock, again, that name Hemlock is such a perfect name for this guy. But as Crosshair is getting tortured with that droid with the syringe, like Leia in A New Hope, Dr. Hemlock smiles. We've only seen him in a couple episodes. I think that's the only time that he smiles. He's a complete sadist. And something you said, Greg, made the connection for me. I don't know why I would be so surprised about this clone hate, because of course the Empire is full of racism. Of course it is. The discrimination, if you look at who they have working with them and for them, there's almost never aliens. Almost never. It's always humans of a certain, pedigree, so to speak. And that's it. I mean, this is like muggles and wizards or mutants and humans. This is another classic archetype being played out in our Star Wars.
Yeah, and I think Andor had a lot of fun playing with particular variants of British accents and gave a lot of the lower class accents to the kind of common people, the people of Andor's planet and so on, and reserved the high-end posh accents for the officers. And as we see kind of, I think it's Captain Pierce, I think was his name at the beginning of this, who you mentioned. He's another one of these really awful Imperial officers that's just there to be a jerk, it seems. And I think they're playing on that again, that there's an elitism there. And it's like, I don't know how they all got there, but it feels like mom and dad bought their commission and bought their way into it, and they get to lord that over the common soldiers, and then clones being even a step below the regular enlisted stormtroopers. So yeah, and it all, part of this makes me think of General Hux too, who had essentially a fascist rally. And so, thinking about that's where this is all going to end up too, is that's what survives the end of the Empire even.
Pretty frightening. And isn't it fascinating that the clones show more individuality than the Empire? I mean, if anything, the Empire act like clones. They act the same. They may look differently, but they act pretty much the same. They have the same kind of recipe for how they view the world. And it's pretty disturbing, which is why they are the bad guy. Crosshair escapes, a great escape sequence where he's drugged and half awake, and then Mason, you pointed out something about his restraints, but you want to describe the little action sequence when Crosshair escapes for us?
He escapes, and he normally shoots the stormtroopers, but when he shoots a nurse, he shoots stun.
You're right. That's right. And why do you think? So again, that shows us that Crosshair is not. Now, would he have done that in season 1?
No.
I mean, he committed murder quite a bit in season 1. Those innocents. In the first couple episodes, and in season 2 at the beginning. That's right. So that is a massive sign of where he is and where he has come from. He wants to communicate and warn Club Force 99, but then he is gassed. And I think, if I understand correctly, Dr. Hemlock, he says, does he say he has immunity or he built up an immunity? Because if he built one up, that means he constantly exposed himself to this gas. to build up an immunity, which that's kind of messed up in and of itself.
Also related to hemlock, of course.
Absolutely.
Right? So
absolutely.
And it reminded me, I'm sure, Mason, this is too old a movie for you, but it reminded me of Princess Bride, where the Dread Pirate Roberts has built up an immunity. So fits that kind of same play, that same gambit.
I love it. Well, I would have been. You've never brought up a Princess Bride reference on the show yet, so I'm glad we finally got that. Let's check that off the bingo card. That's good. That's very good. I'll show you that someday, Mace. It's a great movie. Really cool. Yeah. So we quickly go back to Pabu, where you need a little bit of respite because everything that Crosshair has been through.
Breath.
Yes, take a deep breath. Let's talk about the sequence on Pabu. What kind of jumped out to the both of you about them being back? And let's talk about right before Echo shows up. And Greg, why don't we start with you?
I had one emotion, which is I'm very nervous because it's really idyllic and it seems perfect. And I believe on our show, I likened it to the police officer character in a movie who says, I'm 2 weeks from retirement, and it's not going to end well for him. So there was a line in this one where I believe Hunter says, don't worry, I'm not going to bring the war here. And I just said, oh dear, he's going to bring the war there. It's really what I'm afraid of, because it's a really nice, a different kind of Greek seaside Star Wars planet, something new we haven't seen before. And it just seems a little too perfect and these people too kind to not see some suffering at the hands of the Empire.
Agreed. And Mason, anything you want to say?
I think it's great that Omega's continuing her flying lessons and getting, as Tex says, a little better. Yeah,
she has a great maneuver in this episode. The one thing I have noticed is that Wrecker is thriving. I mean, he is constantly happy. I mean, he's a pretty gregarious person anyway, but he's very, very happy. He's thriving. Hunter does point out, and he hasn't been shown too much caution in a while, but he does say, for soldiers putting down roots, that's an occupational hazard. But before they even get a chance to really explore that further, here comes Echo. I love the reunion with Omega, and she jumps up and gives him a big hug. When they left one another, she embraced him, and he was very reluctant to hug her back or to show any kind of emotion. Probably not used to doing that. But when he sees Omega, that's completely gone, which was nice to see. They're actually, not only are they maturing as far as the decision to leave Sid, but I think their emotional intelligence is raising as well. And that's nice to see in a kid's series, I think, for kids and adults. So anything else before we move on to kind of the big finale? We know Tarkin is here. Tarkin and Dr. Hemlock are plotting how to get rid of the clones. It sounds like Tarkin's all behind the decommissioning thing, which of course Palpatine orchestrated. But the doctor says, nah, just bring him to me. He's almost like a less charismatic Gargamel with Smurfs.
Yeah, and it's certainly very sinister, as you're saying, and I had some interesting thoughts there. One of my best friends here in Boston is Zen Kenobi on Twitter and Instagram, and he loves director Krennic. And I'm saying science section, Tarkin, like, is there a shot? Like, how long till? Because it does seem like, maybe where if we read Catalyst, the prequel novel to Rogue One, it's like, oh yeah, the science division is kind of involved in there. And but certainly I think that feels like a ticking clock or the tick of the roller coaster as we're getting ready to see all of this come together. And just always great to get Steven Stanton back in the mix.
Yes.
He's never too far away. I don't think he gets called in a lot, but whenever we get a little Tarkin or, one of his characters, he's such a great presence in fandom that it's fun to have him back.
I agree. And he completely nails that performance. The ending, let's see, what do we have? We learned that Echo. Oh, you got something, Mace? Go ahead.
When he says, bring it to me, he's like LeBron James. He doesn't pass, just takes all his half-court shots.
See, that's good parenting right there.
That's what Stephen Curry can bring to the podcast. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right.
But I make my half-court shots.
Oh, well, good for you. Practice makes perfect, right? So Rex... we found out that Rex and Echo have been building up a small network of clones. And he very much explains, look, It's all for us. It's all about fighting for our brothers, which Hunter is very much pulled back on because he's focusing on his immediate family. And that's all well and good. And in the real world, you got to focus on your family. That's the most important thing. In a time of war, and of course, this is a fictional universe. This is different because not only do they have the means, but they have the method and the ability to do so. And I feel like they've done such a good job of building Omega up that I don't think Hunter's going to worry about her when the chips are on the line, or I'm mixing my metaphors here, but you know what I mean? It's very much communicating that. Let's talk about the end, though, with Crosshair. As we wrap up, we learned that Dr. Hemlock is from the Advanced Science Division. And did it sound to you, Greg, like he was something of an outcast? Or at least that's maybe just the tone?
No, he'd been drummed out of the Republic,
yes,
and then welcomed back by the Empire. And, I think that makes sense in what we've been learning again about when we change over from one regime to the other. But I also wondered, because in the Republic, it always comes back to Palpatine. Did he just fake the drumming out, like, capturing the Zillo Beast and tucking it away and so on? He just liked his Hemlock and wanted to tuck him away and have him work on this. But certainly, it's very interesting to me that so much of Star Wars storytelling this month really is all kind of connected to cloning and these science experiments. And I think we all see that these strands are bringing together the three trilogies and, making fans from all those feel really rewarded by learning something more about their particular flavor of choice. So I'm very curious to see, what his goal is. It obviously makes me also wonder, like, well, how long after him does Pershing get involved? Are they in the same role and all that? But the timeline is always a little tricky to figure out. But it's really curious to me, and I'm excited to learn more about Hemlock, and I think we'll get more next week.
It's going to be a lot of fun too when we finally get that timeline book, and hopefully that will connect a lot of dots for us too. At the end, we Crosshair. They do discern through some technological wonder that, of course, Tech is able to do, that Crosshair is warning them about Secret Plan 88. That must be some sort of a Bad Batch Clone Force 99 thing. But Crosshair refuses to talk and give up Echo. Again, he just settles in. He doesn't bother with like catchy 80s action hero catchphrases or defiance, like outward anything of that nature. He's not spitting. He's not being aggressive. He just looks up with this really serious, stern look. And I think Crosshair is fighting. He's fighting for his friends who are his family, but he's fighting for his life. But I feel like for the first time in a while, Crosshair can really look inwardly and feel good because he's doing something that he believes and they knows is actually the right thing. What do you think, guys, as we wrap up this conversation?
You said Echo, you mean Omega? He doesn't want to give up Omega.
Yes, Omega. Sorry, I wrote the wrong thing. Yes.
I want to tie that into Mason's earlier point. I think it was Mason of the stunning the nurse the assistant. And I think her name is Emery Carr. Some Googling while we were talking. And I thought there was a really interesting moment in this final scene, and this goes where I'm putting on my tinfoil conspiracy hat. I still want to know Emery Carr's deal. I'm really curious about her and where she came from. And I think for me, there's a lot of kind of, she has the same New Zealand accent, space New Zealand accent. Could she be a part of the cloning program in some way? Or did she get the accent because she spent all her time on Camino or some such? But there's a moment in that discussion where Hemlock reveals to Crosshair that he seeks Omega. He doesn't call her Omega. He says the female clone. And the camera cuts to her. And I was really curious about that, both because of my tinfoil conspiracy, but also if maybe that might be the tipping point for her. If she will, she seems a little less committed to some of these ideals. So could that possibly be, she can't justify doing these types of experiments on a child, which one would hope that would be the tipping point or the breaking point. So I have a little hope for my conspiracy theory, but also I'm just really interested to see where that develops.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
I like that, and I it's hard to not think of that because it's the same actor, but that crossed my mind as well. What's going on with those glasses, and yeah, there's a lot. The last 2 episodes are going to be spectacular, which leads me to the big question before we give our final letter grade. Mason and I were talking, as we've said for a while, for those of you who may have caught on Wednesday mornings, Mason and I do everything on Tuesday. We get everything completely ready to go, so when we wake up, I wake up extra early and get ready. I wake him up, we go downstairs with our breakfast, and we watch Mandalorian. Then we get in the car and go to school. Boom. Next week, as much as I love my Star Wars, I'm not willing to wake up even earlier to watch 2 episodes of Clone Wars and a brand new Mandalorian. So this is my dilemma. I already know which way I'm going. Do we wake up early and watch the 2 episodes of the end of season 2 of the Bad Batch? Or do we watch a new Mandalorian and then wait and watch Bad Batch when we get home? What should we do, fellas? Greg, what would you do?
I would sleep in and watch them both during office hours when my students don't visit me, because that's my trick to getting them done. But, I think my vote often gets decided by what I'm most afraid of having social media spoil during the day. And, usually that's Mandalorian, because there's, I think, a little bigger audience and people get a little more excited about it. But given that it's the finale, I think I might have to tip it towards Bad Batch. But it is 2 full hours of Star Wars is a blessing and a curse on a very early Wednesday morning.
That's right. And Mason, I did you say Bad Batch?
I like Mandalorian better, but since it's finale, we should do Bad Batch.
You know what, buddy? I agree with you. Plus, not only will I have our members of our CWK Alliance asking you what I think about the episodes all day, but so will my students. So I'm going to have to hide from the easier to hide from. I'll have to figure that out. But I think it's going to be Bad Batch. So either way, we're going to watch them both. We're going to love them. We're going to love talking about them. But let's give our letter grades for this episode. Tipping Point. Greg, what is your letter grade and last minute thoughts on this?
Again, it feels a little bit, and I know we teach writing, and so we think about these things where, you can read a paper and you kind of get a sense of where it's going, but every once in a while, the conclusion just really pops in some way that makes you rethink the whole grade. Yes. And so I'm going to admit, I think I'm a little low at the moment, and then after next week, I'm expecting it to pop up. But I'm going to give this a solid B. Good action, but just feels a little bit incomplete at this time. So I'm not ready to go higher than that, despite loving the flying lesson that Mason mentioned, loving some of this intrigue and the complications, but solid B.
Okay, I love that. Mason, what about you?
A- and 4 tenths.
Okay, wow. Tell me why. Tell me why.
We've already said all of it.
You got it. You nailed it. Your golden words are spent. Very good. I'm going to give it an A+. I love it because I feel like this episode again only works because of the emotional investment we put into everything up to this point. The fact that they're taking 3 storylines and slowly bringing the Bad Batch together on the same wavelength. A new villain that manages to frighten us. And frighten the Bad Batch when they are the elite of the elite when it comes to soldiers. There's actual cost. There's actual fear of what's going to happen. And it's just tying things up quite beautifully. I think this whole season has been a gorgeous tapestry of really, really strong storytelling. And I'm just thrilled with it. And yes, it does feel a little bit incomplete, but it's also because they're building. Now, if this were in the middle of the season or right on at the very beginning, then I would be really concerned. But the way that they've put it here, it really works really well for me. And I haven't given an A+ in a while, so I'm glad. Hopefully, I'll say that about the next 2. Well, Greg, thank you so much. You did such a great job. I'd love to have you on this week to talk Mandalorian. What do you say?
Sure, I can find a little room in my schedule, especially for that episode.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. Well, please tell us about, you've got a lot of great things going on with your writing, and of course, with you and Greg and Rebel Base Card. Please let us know all about it and where people can find you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm becoming a professional podcast guest, as has always been my dream. I spend a lot of time here in my basement, and that's primarily with Greg on the breakfast subset of the Rebel Base Card podcast, where we talk about whatever shows are going on. And I think he and I are emotionally preparing for withdrawals after the end of Mandalorian, because we're not quite sure when that next show will come around. And I also copied my professional role model, Jen Sobchakchai, and started a Substack. So if people are interested in some of my writing, I went ahead and bought eyeoncanon.com, EYEONCANON.com, and that just leads to my Substack. And I just wrote something about Everything Everywhere right before it won Best Picture, and there's some old Star Wars pieces. My favorite being one I wrote about Last Jedi, I think in early January that year, and it's kind of funny to see how it's aged 5 years later, and how impressions of that film have changed. So I would love if people would check me out in those places.
I was so happy to hear that you had the actual URL under your wing, because that's great. And I loved your piece on Everything Everywhere All at Once. It was beautifully written, of course, and very insightful, but I would expect nothing less. So thank you so much for sharing your time and talents with us. And Mason, is it still true that people can, if they want to reach you, they can put up a basketball in the sky and you will come and you will play basketball with them?
Sure.
Right on. Well, thanks again, everybody. Be sure to get your top fives ready for Tuesday night so we can talk about this episode and the new episode of The Mandalorian that came out this week. That was, of course, The Foundling. On behalf of myself, Mason Zehr, and Greg Cass, I'm Dan Zehr, and we will see you next time.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.